Hello, good evening, my dear students. This is your Vishnu sir. Today I am here to discuss about a topic known as methodology or the methods. This whole lecture will be divided into two parts. The first part of the lecture will be devoted to the definition of method, and the second part will be the classification and a detailed descriptions of the very first and the old method known as translation-cum-grammer method. So let us begin. What is a method? Method is a means of teaching. It is a thing of recent developments in the field of education. It is aimed at achieving the objective of teaching. Methods change according to the new experiences and researches. The same is true of English teaching or teaching of English. And due to the changing form and status of English, many methods and approaches have been adopted to teach this language. The shortcomings of one method or one approach gave birth to another method or approach. And in order to achieve the objectives of teaching of English, the teacher must adopt the adequate method or approach. For this, a sound knowledge of various methods and approaches, their merits and demerits is essential. Thus, method means different things to different people. Some people consider only classroom techniques as method, whereas others like to include in this term the selection and gradation of material to be taught. According to W.F. Mackey, I am quoting, a method determines what and how much is taught, that is selection, the order in which it is taught, that is gradation, how the meaning and forms are conveyed, that is presentation, and what is done to make the use of language unconscious, that is repetitions. Thus, unquote, thus a method deals with four things: selection, gradation, presentation, and repetition. So this method of W.F. Mackey is considered to be the best definitions of method. But sometimes people use the terms method and approach interchangeably. But there is a difference between the two. Approach is a broader term than method. Approach is axiomatic, that is, the study of self-evident truths. In the words of E.M. Anthony, he says, quote, it states a point of view or philosophy or an assumption which one believes but cannot necessarily prove, unquote. So method is an overall plan which is based on some approach. He further says, quote, method is an overall plan for the orderly presentation of language material, no part of which contradicts and all of which is based upon the selected approach, unquote. Thus, approach deals with the assumptions and method is a procedure based on some assumptions. In this way, within one approach, there can be many methods. I think the detailed descriptions or definitions of method and approach is very much clear to you. Now we'll classify the methods. The methods used to teach English can be divided into two categories. Number one, the old method, and number two, the new method. In the old method, there are number one, translation-cum-grammer method, and number two, direct method or natural method. But due to the various limitations of the old methods, some new methods came into existence. They are: number 1, Dr. West's new method; number 2, the substitution method; number 3, the bilingual methods; number 4, the structural approach, etc. This is a brief classification of the method. Now we'll be discussing in detail about the first method, known as the translation method. It is also known as the translation-cum-grammer method. The translation method, or the translation-cum-grammer method, is also known as classical method. It is the oldest method of teaching English in India, which came with the Britishers. It is as old as the introduction of English in the country. In spite of other methods of teaching English, this method is still used in most of the classrooms in India. In the translation-cum-grammar method, the aim is to teach the students translation and grammar of English language. In this method, it is also presumed that if a student gets acquainted with the meaning of the new words, phrases, and sentences, then he can have a command over the language. The knowledge is given by putting word-to-word translation. I am repeating. This knowledge is given by putting word-to-word translation into mother tongue. This method has no psychological base but has two philosophical bases. That is, number 1, a foreign language can be easily learned through translation. And number 2, grammar is the soul of language. In translation-cum-grammar method, the textbook occupies an important place. The textbook has all the reading materials. It has a specific graded vocabulary and rules of grammar, and each lesson with some new words. In this method, the teacher makes the meaning of every new word clear to students by translating them into mother tongue. Here, the teacher translates every word, phrase, and sentence that he comes across in the book. He also compares the structure of the foreign language with those of the mother tongue. Side by side, he points out the grammatical points and rules. This method is therefore also known as the grammar translation method, because the grammar of the new language is taught with the help of the grammar of the mother tongue. That's why it is called translation-cum-grammar method. So there are some principles of the translation method. Thomson and White say that this translation method is based on 3 sound principles. Number 1, translation interprets the words and phrases of the foreign language in the best possible manner. Number 2, the foreign phraseology is best assimilated in the process of interpretation. And number 3, the structures of the foreign language are best learned when compared and contrasted with those of the mother tongue. So these are the 3 principles pointed out by Thomson and White. Now each and every method has some merits and demerits. First we will be discussing about the merits of the translation methods. The translation-cum-grammar method is used since long time. It has the following merits. Number 1, in translation method, foreign phraseology is quickly explained because translation is the easiest way of explaining the words and phrases of the foreign language. Any other method of explaining vocabulary is time consuming. Translation saves a good deal of time, which would otherwise be wasted if meanings are explained by giving definitions and explanations in the foreign language itself. Number 2, in the translation method, there is a rapid expansion in the vocabulary of the pupils because translation from the foreign language into the mother tongue enables the pupils to develop their vocabulary very rapidly. This is perhaps the easiest way of expanding vocabulary. Number 3, in the translation method, teachers' labor is saved because this method is very easy for the teacher. He has not to put in much labor. This is one factor which explains the popularity of the method. The method suits an average and even below average teachers. Number 4, the translation method makes use of the child's knowledge of his mother tongue. Unlike some other methods, like the direct method, which make no use of the child's knowledge of his mother tongue, the translation method does so. English grammar is taught with the help of the mother tongue. Number 5, in this method, the comprehension of the students is easily tested. Here, the teacher may ask the students to tell in the mother tongue what they have learned. This is especially true of the early stage. Thus, translation method helps in testing comprehension also. Number 6, this method fulfills one important maxim, which is, I'm quoting, proceed from known to unknown, unquote. It gives correct knowledge of English because it explains grammatical rules. Number 7, this method can be used in every situation. Bhatia comments, to quote, translation is effective in explaining those English words which represent either concrete objects not at one hand or quality and action when the latter two cannot be clearly demonstrated, unquote. The translation method can be easily used even in an overcrowded class. Sturm, a German scholar, emphasizes the importance of this method by saying, he says, it is not till one can translate the word that one has complete mastery over it, so that one not only understands it but can use it, unquote. So these are some of the merits of the translation-cum-grammer method. But this method has also got some demerits, and they are, today some people consider the translation-cum-grammer method is becoming gradually obsolete because of some shortcomings or demerits. The shortcomings are, number 1, we know that the natural order of learning language is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. This is the way how a child learns his mother tongue. But in translation method, the teaching of language starts with the teaching of reading. So this method has a focus on only reading, not on other 3 skills, that is listening and speaking and writing. Number 2 demerit, translation method lays emphasis on reading alone, with the result that speech is neglected. The pupils are not provided any practice in oral work. This explains why many of our students, even at the college level, are tongue-tied so far as speaking is concerned. The third demerit of this method is that the translation method does not teach correct articulation, intonation, and pronunciation. Number 4, translation is indeed a difficult task because exact translation from one language to another is not possible. There are some words, idioms, and phrases in English which reflect the culture, traditions, and customs of English people. They cannot be translated into mother tongue without losing the correct effect. Number 5. The translation method fails to create a direct contact between thought and expression. Children begin thinking in their mother tongue and then they convert their ideas into English. Number 6 demerit is this method helps in developing bookish English and preventing the delicate expression. Number 7, translation method attempts to teach English by rules and not by use. As Dr. Ballard has very aptly pointed out, he says, to quote, to speak any language, whether native or foreign, entirely by rule is quite impossible. Unquote. A language is a skill subject. It is learnt by practice and not by just memorizing the rules. And the last demerit, translation method is uninteresting. It is dull and mechanical because the learner is a passive recipient of knowledge. He doesn't take part actively in the learning process. So these are some of the demerits of the translation-cum-grammer method. And now let me conclude the lesson. The translation method, although it has been universally condemned, continues to be popular with most of the English teachers in India because they find it easy to teach through this method. This method is responsible for the poor attainment of our pupils in English. And perhaps this may be the cause of falling standards of English in India. Researches in English language learning have proved that this method is ineffective and obsolete. So due to this, we have some other methods like the direct methods and the substitution method, Dr. West method, bilingual methods, etc. So today's this very class is over.